When John, my husband, was taking his final breath, my phone vibrated. "Mom, we're busy. Let's talk tomorrow." I stood there, surrounded by the sharp sting of disinfectant and the fading sound of John's breathing, and I had no tears left to cry. My 3 children, Emily, Alex and Sophie, the ones I spent my entire life loving, chose to attend an extravagant birthday party in Manhattan instead of seeing their father one last time. They left me alone in that cold room at St. Mary's Hospital, drowning in grief and rising fury. I didn't just lose my husband that night. I realized I had also lost the children I once trusted with my whole heart. But I did not stay silent. I, Margaret Lawson, decided to use my own power and intellect to show them that love, honesty, and responsibility are not things you simply abandon. In this video, you will witness how I calculated every move, every twist, to teach them a lesson so costly they will never forget it. Prepare yourself for every moment, every tear, every surge of anger, because sometimes revenge is the justice of the heart. In the cold, sterile hospital room, the heavy scent of disinfectant clung to my nose. The rhythmic beeping of the ventilator and the faint, weakening heartbeat of John echoed like a countdown, ticking away the last seconds of his life. I held his hand tightly, feeling every final breath as if it were dragging me into a bottomless pit of despair. And then my phone vibrated. A message from Emily, my eldest daughter, lit up the screen. "Mom, we're busy. We'll talk tomorrow." I stood there, looking at the 3 children I had devoted my entire life to. Children who now cared only about their extravagant parties in Manhattan. Alex, my middle son, replied with a laughing emoji, while Sophie sent a picture of a cupcake with sparkling candles, as if they were celebrating, completely unaffected by the fact that their father was dying. A sharp pain pierced through my chest. In the most crucial moment of our lives, they chose to abandon their father and abandon me, their mother, with cold, effortless indifference. I watched their polished shoes disappear down the hospital hallway. The automatic doors slid shut, leaving behind a room that fell eerily silent, broken only by John's weakening breaths. My heart felt unbearably heavy. I had no tears left, only rising fury, disappointment, and a hollow emptiness spreading through my body, as though every drop of love I had ever poured into them had been drained away. I remembered the countless sleepless nights John and I spent, teaching them about morals, kindness, responsibility, and love. Now, all those lessons felt like nothing more than air drifting into the past. But somewhere within that pain and betrayal, a thought flashed through me. If they didn't understand the value of family, if they couldn't appreciate what their parents had sacrificed for them, then I would teach them a lesson they would never forget. A silent, meticulous plan began to form in my mind, built on my legal authority and intellect. I wouldn't lash out in reckless anger. No, I would make them feel every consequence, every cut from their own carelessness and cruelty. I remembered all the times John suffered in silence, the times our children borrowed money and abandoned him afterward, the moments he swallowed his pride just to protect their image in my eyes. And now, all those secrets would come to light. I didn't just lose my husband. I had to reclaim my power, restore justice, and above all, teach those ungrateful children the true meaning of family. In that still, quiet room, I looked at my husband one last time. His eyes were heavy, yet filled with unspoken trust. I made a promise in my heart. From this moment on, Margaret Lawson would no longer be the gentle, forgiving mother they once knew. I would be the storm descending upon their lives, forcing them to realize that love and betrayal both demand a price. And when they returned, looking at me with the expectation of the mother they once had, they would finally understand. Nothing in life is free, and indifference sometimes costs you your entire family. That night, as New York City glowed with neon outside the window, I sat quietly beside John's bed. I felt his very last breath slipping away, and in that moment a part of me died with him. But the rest, the part of Margaret that had long been buried, the part filled with rage and resolve, rose stronger than ever, and I knew then the journey of revenge, of justice for John and for my own shattered heart had only just begun. When John's final breath dissolved into the cold air of that hospital room, I remained seated there, still holding his hand, as if letting go would cause the entire world to collapse. New York outside was bright, loud, yet inside me existed only a void that had just been torn open. And in that exact moment, I felt it clearly. The fragile, tender Margaret died with John. What remained was the promise I had not yet spoken aloud. Before John's heartbeat began to slow, he opened his eyes to look at me. Those eyes, tired, clouded by pain, still carried a profound trust that had never once faded throughout our entire lifetime together. He tried to squeeze my hand, a squeeze so weak it felt like nothing more than a passing breeze, but to me, it carried the weight of a final wish. Margaret. His voice rasped, thin and brittle, like the last wind of the season. Don't let them treat you like you're nothing. I leaned closer, listening to each fragmented breath. If all they care about is money. He paused, coughing weakly, then forced himself to continue. Then let them learn how to live without it. A coldness swept through my whole body, not from the hospital's air conditioning, but because I knew these weren't ordinary final words. This was a truth John had hidden, a disappointment he never wanted me to see. All his life, he chose silence for the sake of family peace. But now, in the last moment before leaving me, he chose to say what he had never dared to say. He knew. He knew our children had changed. He knew they looked at us as bottomless money dispensers. He knew they used family affection as currency to bargain for whatever they wanted. And he wanted me, the woman who had been too soft-hearted for too long, not to sacrifice any further. I held his hand, those fingers already turning cold. John, what am I supposed to do? I whispered, my throat burning. He looked at me for a long, long time, as though trying to etch my face into his memory one last time. And then, with the final strength he had left, make them understand who loved them the most, and who they chose to abandon. His words cut into my heart like a blade. I knew John didn't resent our children, but he wanted them to learn the lesson he never managed to teach them fully. Family is not something you negotiate. Love is not something you discard, depending on convenience. A second later, the monitor shifted into an alarming rhythm. Doctors and nurses rushed in. I was pushed aside, a single step backward, a step I didn't want to take. Everything happened so fast, I couldn't say another word. No final kiss, no "I love you," no promise that I would carry out what he had asked of me. When the doctor shook his head, when the white sheet was pulled over John's face, I felt myself split in two. One half was the grieving wife. The other half was the mother who had just received a mission. I stood still in the room. The hospital light cast a long shadow over John's unmoving body. I stared at that shadow and understood. This darkness would not leave until I fulfilled his final request. I stepped out of the room. The hallway stretched endlessly, lit by dim neon lights. And there, at the centre of the corridor, my shoulders trembled one last time, before every soft emotion hardened into steel. I wiped my tears, lifted my chin. "I'll do it, John. I promise." From that moment forward, I knew the path ahead was no longer that of a gentle mother. It was the path of a woman who understood that sometimes, to preserve the true value of family, you must destroy what has already rotted from within. I left the hospital with heavy steps, but inside me was a decision sharp as a blade. I would let my children taste life without the privileges they had always assumed were theirs by default. And when that day came, they would understand better than anyone. No one abandons a dying father without paying the price. After leaving the hospital, I felt a cold draught cling to each of my steps along the empty hallway. My decision, the promise I had made to John, remained a sharp blade cutting into my heart. Yet at the same time, it was the fire pushing me forward. I knew that to fulfill that promise, it wasn't only my children who would have to pay the price. The way they viewed family itself would have to change. Everything would begin today, starting with John's funeral. The day of the funeral arrived, and the sky was grey and heavy, as if all of New York felt the weight of my grief. I stepped into the church, dressed in black, shoulders straight, expressions solemn, eyes scanning the room. Silence filled the space, broken only by hurried footsteps of a few relatives and the mournful organ music echoing through the air. I could still hear the pounding of my own heart, my faint breaths mixing with the scent of white chrysanthemums and burning candles. And then they appeared, Emily, Alex and Sophie. The three children I once trusted unconditionally walked in with indifferent expressions, heavy breaths, and the faint smell of alcohol clinging to their clothes. They were almost an hour late, looking around as though they were attending some distant event, wearing boredom on their faces, as if this was just an inconvenient obligation they had to check off. The way they walked past me, without meeting my eyes, without bowing their heads before John's coffin, made my blood boil. Not from sudden anger, but from a deep, profound disappointment, heavier than anything I had ever felt. In that moment, I realized I hadn't only lost my husband, I had also lost the children I had raised with every ounce of love inside me. Watching them stand there, I remembered every sleepless night I stayed awake to take care of them, every lesson, every quiet sacrifice. They had forgotten, or perhaps never valued, any of it. But I had no time left for tears. Margaret Lawson was no longer the mother who would endure her children's indifference in silence. I had made a promise to John, and I would keep it. I stepped closer to the coffin, my voice soft but echoing clearly through the still air. John is gone, and from today on, you must understand that family is not something automatic, not something you treat like a resource to use or discard. No one responded, but I saw subtle changes in their expressions. Emily tightened her fist. Alex rolled his eyes. Sophie muttered something under her breath. It seemed, for the first time, the presence of their father forced them into a moment of discomfort. When the priest began the ceremony, I quietly pulled out my phone, recording a few moments, not to share, not to flaunt, but for myself, Margaret, to preserve evidence of their indifference. With every passing second, the anger, the grief, and the determination for revenge grew inside me. I knew all of it would be used to teach them a lesson. Indifference has consequences, and a family is not something you exploit. Sitting silently in the church, I looked around. Family members, friends, colleagues came to offer condolences, but my eyes remained fixed on my 3 children. Emily bowed her head. Alex tilted his. Sophie wiped away a tear when she thought no one was watching. They didn't understand anything yet, but I knew, step by step, detail by detail, they would soon be forced to face the truth. John was gone, but I was still here. And I would make sure they understood the loss, understood the true value of a parent's love, of family, and of the life they had taken for granted. When the ceremony ended, I stood by the door, watching my children walk out with slumped shoulders and heavy steps. Inside me, the last soft part of Margaret had died. A decisive version of myself rose in its place, ready for the next steps. This was their first lesson, but it was only the beginning. What I had prepared for them would be deep, quiet, and inescapable. And when night fell over New York, the streetlights reflecting across my face, I whispered to myself, "They will understand. One day, they will pay for this indifference." Because Margaret Lawson was no longer the gentle mother she once was, I was the coming storm, and my children's lives would never be the same again. When the funeral ended, I stood outside the church doors, watching my 3 children walk out. Their shoulders slumped, their steps heavy, their eyes avoiding mine. But I no longer felt soft toward them. Margaret Lawson was now clear-minded, sharp, and inside me a storm of vengeance was quietly burning. I knew the real trial hadn't even begun. The lessons John wanted me to teach them would now unfold silently, precisely, and without any room for denial. Just a few hours later, when everyone had returned home, the 3 children gathered in the spacious living room that once was the heart of our family. The air suddenly thickened, as if every chair, every picture on the wall was watching their footsteps. They weren't here to share grief. They were here to ask about the will, about their father's assets, something they had always considered their unquestionable right. Emily stepped toward my desk, her eyes still red, but her tone full of calculation. "Mum, hand this house over to us." "You don't need it, do you?" Alex added with a half smirk of contempt. "Keep the money if you want, but the house is ours. Isn't that right?" Sophie, standing beside them, shy yet with an icy gaze, whispered, "You know Dad always wanted us to have it. Doesn't Mom agree?" I looked at them. My 3 children, the ones I once held close, taught, lost sleep over, now standing before me like this. A part of me wanted to scream, to expose their ingratitude. But Margaret Lawson was no longer the soft-hearted mother she used to be. I stayed silent. A silence heavy enough, deep enough, to make them uneasy. In that moment, the plan formed clearly in my mind. No yelling, no accusations, only quiet but razor-sharp actions. Every step fully legal, every turn crafted to make them face the consequences themselves. John had told me, "Let them learn to live without money if money is all they care about." And now I would fulfill that promise. I placed my hand on the glass door, looking out onto the glowing New York streets. Outside, life went on, taxis speeding by, pedestrians rushing, neon lights reflecting on the windows. Inside, I stood between my children, feeling the heavy tension in the air. I knew that every word, every gesture, every glance would be etched into their memories. I would make sure every step, every decision from now on would become a lesson they would never forget. Emily, Alex and Sophie began arguing among themselves again, their voices rising. "Why does Mum even need to keep anything? Let us handle it. Dad's gone. Why is Mum being so stubborn? This house is ours. She can't keep it forever." Each word felt like a blade touching my heart. But instead of pain, I felt a quiet thrill. This was the moment they revealed their true selves, the greed, the coldness, the selfishness I had seen long ago. I stepped forward, my voice calm but icy. "Stop arguing. Your father left me full authority over all assets, and I will use it exactly as he instructed. Not to make your lives difficult, but to teach you a lesson about responsibility, family, and the value of love. Things none of you have ever truly appreciated." Their eyes shifted among one another, the tension slowly replaced by unease. Emily bit her lip. Alex clenched his fists. Sophie stared at the floor. They didn't understand yet, but confusion had already found its way in. I allowed myself a faint smile, not of joy, but of the quiet satisfaction of someone who knows a storm is coming, and it will arrive with precision, leaving nothing untouched. I turned back toward the window, the glow of the city lights brushing against my face. Inside me, a sharp decision crystallized. From this moment on, Margaret Lawson would no longer be the soft mother they were used to. I would control every step they took, make them feel the weight of loss, and show them that every action carries consequences. And as night fell over Manhattan, I knew the first lesson had begun. No more tears for their ingratitude, only a silent, inevitable reckoning. Each step, each word, each decision from now on would be a trial unlike anything they had ever faced. Margaret Lawson was ready, and this family storm had only just begun. After that night's argument, the house fell into a silence so deep I could hear the clock's hands move, tick by tick, on the wall. My 3 children went to bed with frustration, disappointment, and ambitions blocked. But I knew that silence was only temporary. Tomorrow, everything would be even more intense, and it was. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the white curtains of New York. I heard Alex pound on the dining table. "Mum, we need to clear things up today. I want to see the will." Emily crossed her arms, stepping forward in heels as sharp as her attitude. "We can't leave things vague like this." Sophie, always playing the gentle role, simply sat down, her eyes full of expectation, almost pleading, yet still demanding. I said nothing. I simply opened a wooden drawer and took out a thick file John had entrusted to me months before he fell ill. The cover remained pristine, evoking the image of the man I had loved with all my youth, and who had trusted me enough to deliver his final lesson to our children. I placed the file on the table. The room seemed to hold its breath. Slowly I opened the first page. They leaned forward, like 3 predators spotting their prey, ready to pounce at any moment. And then their eyes froze, stopped. John had left, 70% of the assets to me, the remainder divided equally among the 3 children. And most importantly, all financial control, including accounts, property, stocks and investment funds, rested entirely with me for the first 10 years. No one spoke. The air felt as if it had been sucked into a black hole. Alex exploded first. "What? How could Dad—" Emily cut him off, voice high-pitched. "No! There's got to be a mistake. Mum must have forced him to sign." Sophie looked at me, eyes trembling. "Mum, you know Dad loved us. Why? Why is it like this?" I looked at each of them, 3 different faces, yet in that moment all shared the same expression, disbelief that their father had placed me above all else. I closed the will, keeping my voice calm to intensify their unease. "Do you think your father didn't know anything? He knew exactly who only came around for money, who disappeared when he was sick, who prioritized parties over seeing him one last time." Their expressions changed, as if someone had slapped them, hard and precise. Emily shouted, "Mom, are you punishing us?" I answered without raising my voice, "Your father left me the authority to teach you the lesson he never finished." I stood and walked to the window. Cars rushed down the streets, horns echoing, reminding me of John's last words. Don't let them treat you like you're nothing. If all they care about is money, let them learn to live without it. I turned to face my 3 children, bewildered and in part afraid. My voice was low, yet heavy as iron. From today, everything changes. You didn't come to see your father one last time. Now, I will teach you a lesson. Alex clenched his fists, trying to maintain composure, but failed. Emily looked at me as if I were a stranger. Sophie cried, but not for their father, for the assets not being what she wanted. I continued, each word slicing through their illusions. For the next 10 years, I hold the power. I decide the spending. I approve every transaction. Anyone who wants their share must prove they deserve it. No one spoke. Only the quiet collapse in the eyes of the 3 children I had given birth to, raised and protected. But now I was no longer the mother who loved unconditionally. I had become the keeper of the door, the only door leading to the assets they desired. And that door had begun to close. After the morning reading of the will, the house fell into a strange state. Silent but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes before a storm, when each person is desperately trying to hide their confusion, anger, and the fear of losing the control they'd used to dominate me for years. That afternoon, when Alex, Emily and Sophie stormed off to their rooms, I stayed in the living room, staring at the closed will. Sunlight filtered through the window and washed over the last page, where John had left his trembling yet resolute signature. I ran my fingers across it, feeling as if I were touching the last warmth of his body and the strength he had entrusted to me. I knew that simply reading the will wouldn't be enough to shake them. They would resist, blame me, and try to reclaim what they had always assumed was rightfully theirs. So then, it was time to open the second door of the plan, the door John himself had told me to use when necessary. I stood up and walked to the small office at the end of the hallway. On the desk was the same laptop John and I used to manage the family finances. I opened it. It took only a few minutes to fill in the information, verify ownership, and access the banking system. Everything was part of the assets John had transferred fully to me. I looked at the numbers, amounts my children had spent recklessly, credit cards drowned in debt, unusual withdrawals in the middle of the night, and suddenly I remembered John's words. If they only know how to live off money, let them learn how to live without it. My hand did not tremble. I clicked, "Frozen account, temporary hold." One by one, every account, every card, turned into a locked door. I carried out the action with a strange calmness, as if it wasn't revenge, but the inevitable execution of justice. Only a few hours later, the chaos began. My phone rang for the first time at 6 p.m. It was Alex. His voice was sharp, panicked, irritated. "Mom, my card is frozen. I need to pay my car loan. Turn it back on." I replied calmly, "Your father is gone. Handle it yourself." He went silent for a moment, then erupted. "What do you mean? I need the money." I hung up. 5 minutes later, Emily called. "Mom, I'm at the salon. My card won't swipe. What are you doing?" I answered, "Do you remember where you were when your father was dying?" Silence on the other end. Then her voice returned, smaller but edged with irritation. "That has nothing to do with this. Turn my account back on." I ended the call. Then came Sophie. Her voice cracked like she had been crying and running at the same time. "Mom, my landlord is collecting rent. They're going to kick me out. Please help me." I drew in a deep breath, feeling the weight of every word I was about to say. "The day your father died, I called you, and you told me, 'We'll talk tomorrow.' Today I'm telling you the same thing. We'll talk tomorrow. For now, handle it yourself." I heard Sophie break into sobs, but my heart didn't soften the way it used to. Some lessons, they can only learn through pain. For the rest of the evening, my phone rang non-stop. Calls, texts, then more calls, but I didn't pick up again. I simply watched the screen vibrating like it was losing its mind and realized something. All this time, they had only seen me as a walking wallet, not a mother, not a woman who had just lost her husband. I stood up, drew the curtains aside, and looked down at the street sinking into night. For the first time in years, I felt like I had the right to breathe, the right to choose, the right to restore justice for the man who had died alone. And deep in my chest, the cold flame of resolve ignited. If my 3 children wanted to continue living like people who only knew how to demand, I would show them what life looked like without the easy money they used to cover the holes in their souls. This was only the beginning. The first door had closed. The second door had just been locked. And in the darkness of that house, I knew I was about to open the third door, the door that would change this family forever. That night, after freezing all my children's accounts, the house sank into a silence so unnervingly deep it felt alive. But I knew that quiet would not last. A mother's instinct gave me a sharp, undeniable sense. The real storm was already on its way, and it would erupt right here, inside the home I had spent so many years trying to keep peaceful. I placed my phone face down on the table, lifted my cup of hot tea and inhaled slowly. The faint scent of chamomile instantly reminded me of John. If he was still alive, he would probably place a hand on my shoulder and say, "Do whatever you feel is right." Just thinking of that made me strong enough to face whatever waited for me outside that moment. And just as I expected, the doorbell rang close to 10 p.m. Not once, but over and over, urgent, furious. I stood up, fixed my coat, and walked into the hallway. When I opened the door, the streetlight spilled across 3 familiar faces, except now distorted with anger, disappointment, and fear. Alex stood in front, face red as if he had sprinted all the way here. Emily hovered behind him, arms crossed, eyes sharp as knives. And Sophie clung to Emily's sleeve, her eyes brimming with tears, though I couldn't tell if from worry or shame. Alex shouted first, "What's wrong with you, Mum? Why did you freeze our accounts?" Emily followed, her voice sharp with bitterness. "Are you trying to punish us? We're your children. You can't do that." Sophie's voice trembled. "I don't have money to pay rent. You're pushing me into a corner." I stood there, looking at the 3 children who once lay in my arms, who once needed me to sing them to sleep, who once relied on me to shield them from every storm. But now, none of the children I used to know remained. They weren't here out of love. They were here to demand, to claim their entitlement, to force me to keep being the money machine they had grown dependent on. I didn't say a word. I simply stepped aside and gestured for them to enter. The door closed behind us, and the air in the room instantly turned thick. They started arguing loudly, slamming the table, stomping across the living room, voices echoing off the walls. Alex pointed directly at me. "You have no right to do this. We've always used that money." I looked at him, slowly, steadily. "That money," I said, "belonged to your father. The man you didn't even bother to see one last time. Emily folded her arms and let out a mocking laugh. Oh God, Mum, are we doing this again? He's dead. Dead is dead. We have our lives to worry about now. Her words struck like a cold knife to my heart, but my heart had grown used to such wounds. I stepped forward, standing in the centre of the living room under the dim yellow glow of the floor lamp. All three of them turned to me. I let the silence stretch for a few seconds, just long enough for my gaze to force them into stillness. Then I said, each word carving itself into the air, "You abandoned your father for a party, and from that moment on, this family was no longer the same." No one spoke. No one protested. The truth carried a weight too heavy for excuses to smother. Alex clenched his fists and took a step forward. "So what do you want? Want us to kneel and apologize? Want us to feel guilty?" I looked straight into his eyes. "No, I want you to grow up." Emily frowned, irritated. "By cutting off all our money?" My voice was soft, but sharp enough to slice through the room. "Money can't teach you what you've lost." The room fell silent. Sophie began sobbing. Alex kicked the leg of a chair in frustration. Emily turned away, but I saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. They came here to rebel, but they didn't realize I was no longer the mother who nodded at everything they wanted. I stood there alone, facing three angry and desperate children, and for the first time in years, I didn't back away. I felt strong. I felt right. I felt free. The storm had arrived, but I, Margaret Lawson, was ready to stand at its centre, because I knew this was only the beginning. And the lesson I was about to teach them would hurt far more than a night without money. After the uprising that night, my house suddenly fell into a strange, unnatural quiet. No more pounding on the door, no more long messages filled with blame, no more calls hurled at me like weapons. That silence didn't bring relief, it brought unease. There was something in my children's eyes as they left, something like fear mixed with resentment that told me this wasn't over, not even close. It was that unease that drew me into my husband's study the next morning, a room left untouched since the day he died. The old wooden chair he always sat in, his reading glasses still resting on the table, and the faint trace of his cologne lingering in the air, all of it twisted painfully inside my chest. I ran my fingers across the surface of the desk, as if touching the memories of a man who tried to keep this family together until his last breath. And that's when I found it, a small wooden box tucked deep inside the bottom drawer. A simple lock, yet I knew my husband. He only locked away the things that truly mattered. When I opened it, it felt like the entire world stopped breathing. Inside were his journals, pages now yellowed, and a stack of printed messages, emails, evidence of things he had never told me. Not me, not anyone. Each journal page carried neat, careful handwriting, but every stroke trembled. They borrowed money for the third time this month. I said no, and they threatened to cut ties if I didn't help. They said I'm a burden. I laughed and told them it's fine, but I couldn't sleep tonight. I want to tell my wife, but I don't want her to hurt. Each line pierced through me like a blade. I didn't even notice when tears began falling. The gentle man I loved had suffered far more than I ever imagined. He chose silence, chose to carry the weight alone, chose to let me believe our children still cared, just to protect the last fragile piece of peace in this family. Then I opened the stack of messages, undeniable proof of lies, excuses, manipulations, fake illnesses, fake accidents, fake emergencies just to get money. One message read, "If you don't help, then I don't have a father anymore." I inhaled sharply. Each page told a different story about the children I had raised, a story I was never given the chance to know. I gathered everything, placed it neatly on the desk, and in that moment I knew exactly what I needed to do. If my children wanted the truth, I would show them everything. No protecting, no shielding, no enabling. That evening, I sent a message to the family group chat, short, cold, unmistakably final. Tomorrow night, 7 p.m, family meeting. Whoever doesn't come deals with the consequences. Minutes later, the notifications burst in, panic radiating through each message. "What now, Mom? Stop making everything such a big deal." "I'm busy. Let's do another day." I replied with only one sentence. There is no other day. The next morning, I placed the journals and all the documents into a brown envelope. My hands trembled as I sealed it, but my heart felt no uncertainty. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. This, finally, was justice for my husband. I looked up at his photo on the shelf and whispered, "My love, what you hid, I will speak. Even if it hurts, it must be said." Sunlight streamed through the window, as if answering me in silence. Tomorrow night, the truth would be laid bare. No more secrets, no more illusions of the perfect children they pretended to be. Only the raw reality of what they had done, and the consequences they would finally have to face. The fateful night came faster than I expected. After placing the envelope on the table and staring at it the entire day, I realized I was ready. Or perhaps, more truthfully, there was simply no path left to retreat. The memories from my husband's journals clung to me like shadows. Every word, every sigh he scribbled felt like he was standing beside me, reminding me that this wasn't what I wanted to do, but what I had to do. The truth could no longer stay buried, and the dignity of the man I loved deserved to be defended, even in death. 7 p.m. The cars arrived one by one. No yelling this time, no slamming doors, but the silence was suffocating. Each child avoided my eyes, as if they sensed something terrible was waiting for them. I walked into the living room where they already sat, fidgeting, uneasy, or rather, worried about what I might know. "Why did you call us so urgently?" the middle one asked, defensive. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I placed the brown envelope on the table, sat down and opened it before their anxious eyes. "Tonight," I began slowly, "we're going to talk about your father." They frowned. One sighed impatiently. Another rolled their eyes, as if the man who raised them had become nothing more than a fading background memory. But for me, he was still here, in every breath. I unlocked my phone, opened the folder with photos of the journals and messages, and without hesitation placed the screen at the centre of the table. "These," I said, "are the things your father hid." Then I read them, line by line, so no one could pretend, no one could escape, no one could lie to themselves any more. They asked for money again. I said no. They called me a bad father. They haven't visited in 6 months. I miss them, but I don't want to bother anyone. I felt dizzy all week. I texted for help. They saw it and didn't reply. I drove myself to the hospital alone. I didn't want my wife to worry. No one spoke. Only the ticking of the clock, cold, metallic, filled the room. The eldest child's face turned ashen. The middle one bit their lip until it bled. The youngest stared at the carpet, as if hoping it would swallow them whole. When I reached the part where my husband wrote about being spoken to harshly, the eldest suddenly stood up and shouted, We didn't mean to hurt him. We were just living our own lives. I lifted my head and looked at the child I once thought would protect this family. My voice held no softness, not anymore. And your father, I replied, each word falling heavy like a stone, was busy dying. Silence, frozen, absolute. I continued, steady, merciless, the kind of mercilessness they had forced me to learn. While you were partying, laughing, posting photos, your father lay in a hospital bed, hands turning cold. He asked the nurse if anyone had come, and he still defended you. The youngest burst into tears, but I no longer reached out. I had spent my whole life reaching out. Do you think I wanted to show you all this? I asked. I didn't, but I had to, because you refused to face the truth, and because your father deserves respect, even in death. The middle child stammered through shaky breaths. But Dad hid it, Mum. We didn't know. You didn't know, I replied, because you never wanted to know. I turned the phone back around, locked the screen and set it aside. In that moment, I saw it clearly. There was nowhere left for them to run. Tonight isn't about blame, I said. It's about truth standing in front of you, raw and painful. If you want to keep even a fragment of this family, it starts with admitting what you've done. No one spoke, but this silence was different, heavy, crushing, confessional. I stood up. Your father endured enough. Now, it's your turn to take responsibility. The room sank into a stunned, hollow stillness, and from that moment on, I knew this family battle had just entered a new stage. No more hiding, no more pretending, only truth and consequences. After that heavy confrontation, the house sank into a silence so deep I could hear my own heartbeat pulsing inside my chest. The kids left without looking me in the eye. The door closed, leaving behind the bitter, choking scent of truth that had just been exposed. Sharp, raw, and impossible to swallow. I thought I would feel relieved, but I didn't. The only thing I felt was an unfamiliar emptiness, the emptiness of a mother who has gone too far to turn back, and who no longer has a reason to stop. The next morning, the first message arrived. Mum, my company just terminated my contract. It was from my oldest, Ethan, the one who always believed he was the most successful, the one who didn't need family, the one who once told his father, I can take care of myself. The company he bragged about, for years, had frozen every project, and the son who thought he was invincible was dismissed with nothing more than a cold email. I stared at the message as sunlight streamed through the window. I didn't reply. The days of rushing to catch him every time he fell were over. 3 days later, the second message came from my middle daughter, Sophia. Mom, my credit card got frozen. My debt is being transferred to a collection agency. What do I do? That was the price she paid for years of reckless spending, for the designer bags she bought with excuses like, I need this to sign a contract. The truth was, she had never signed anything in her life. She only knew how to live off her parents' money, then off her father's, until the day the man died, and she couldn't even be bothered to see him one last time. I read the message, put my phone down, and continued pouring my tea. Sometimes life must let people pay the debts they created. But the one who stunned me was the youngest, Lucas, the sweet, affectionate child, until he grew up and threw himself into a life of endless indulgence. He called near midnight, his voice shaking. Mom, Emily left me. I sat up straight. He continued between ragged breaths. She said, She doesn't want to be with a man who has no future and one she has to financially support. I wasn't surprised Emily never truly loved him. She loved the wallet behind him, and that wallet had been locked tight by me, with no air left to breathe. I listened as my youngest cried like a child abandoned. A part of me ached, but another part reminded me he too abandoned his father, just as heartlessly as his girlfriend abandoned him now. And suddenly I understood my husband's words more than ever. If they only understand money, then let them learn how to live without it. I was doing what he couldn't, and sometimes cruelty is the only thing that can save a family. The weeks that followed were a chain reaction of collapse, like dominoes falling one after another. Ethan, the one who once looked down on the world, had to take a temporary job at a small garage on the outskirts of town. His hands weren't used to grease and machinery, but no company wanted to hire someone dismissed for lack of responsibility. Sophia lived in constant fear of being sued for bad debt. Every night she called me, voice trembling. "I didn't think it would be this bad. Mom, can you reopen my account just this month?" But for her, just this month came every month. So I simply answered, no. And Lucas? He was the one who broke the hardest. Ever since Emily left, he stayed in his tiny apartment, eating instant noodles and avoiding friends. For the first time in his life, he tasted what it felt like to be abandoned at the exact moment he needed someone most. Just as he once did to his father. On the 20th day after that confrontation, all three returned to my house. No yelling, no defiance. Just three exhausted, hollow faces, as if they had lost their entire world. I stood at the doorway looking at them, and for the first time in years, I saw true fragility in each of their eyes. I said nothing. I let them feel it, because people only truly change when life itself forces them to their knees. The three children stood at my doorstep, no longer carrying the pride that had wounded me for so many years. They looked as if they had just lost a battle, and the opponent was life itself. And I, the mother who had once been weak, suddenly became a witness to the shattering of the generation I had raised. I opened the door. No hugs, no questions. I just silently watched them step inside, as if I were observing three living versions of consequence. Ethan sank into the wooden chair, hands scarred and smeared with grease. Sophia leaned against the doorframe, her eyes darkened by sleepless nights. And Lucas, he simply sat on the floor, shoulders trembling as the winter chill crept in. Silence stretched between us like a shadow no one dared touch. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice hoarse. "Mom, we were wrong." It wasn't the apology I had been waiting for, but it was the first words I had heard that came from their hearts, not from their arrogant selves. I sat at the wooden table by the window, the same table where my husband and I used to drink coffee every morning. There, in the old oak box he had always used to store important things, I pulled out 3 ivory-coloured envelopes. Each bore the name of a child, written in handwriting I would recognise anywhere. Michael's handwriting. I looked at them calmly and said, "You want to understand your father? To know what he thought in his final days? Then sit down and read." The 3 of them huddled together, a rare moment I had thought lost forever. I handed each envelope to the respective child. Lucas held his with trembling hands. Sophia tried to stay composed, her lips pressed so tightly they were pale. And Ethan, he drew a deep breath, as if bracing himself to face the judgment meant for him. I watched the children open the letters, and suddenly the room fell into a sacred silence. "If you love your mother, then prove it." That was the first line in all 3 letters, written the same, in the same hand, a final reminder from a man who had been hurt by his children, yet loved them until his last breath. Michael's handwriting was shakier than usual, I realised. These were the words of a man facing death, yet trying to maintain calm as he wrote his final message. I do not need you to succeed. I only need you to have compassion. Sophia was the first to cry. Her sobs choked the room, shattering the silence that had already been heavy with pain. Ethan slumped, hands covering his face. And Lucas, the softest one, stared at the words, as if every letter were cutting into his heart. I quietly watched the 3 children I had spent my life protecting. They were not bad. They were simply children raised in indulgence and in the quiet sacrifices of their father. Michael had wanted me to teach them this lesson, letting life finish what he had started. I sat down beside them and spoke, my voice slow but strong enough that each word struck like a blade against the wall of numbness that had enveloped this family for years. Your father forgave you long ago. He believed that one day you would understand. Today is that day. I could see their shoulders slump, as if the letters had stripped away all resistance, leaving only genuine, belated remorse. Sophia handed me her letter, voice trembling. Mom, do we still have a chance? That question pierced the softest part of me. I had longed to hear it, but to hear it, we had all paid too high a price. The price of a husband, a father. I placed my hand on Michael's letter and said, a chance is not given by me. It is created by you. The 3 were silent. I looked deeply into their eyes, and for the first time since Michael passed, I spoke with the voice of a mother, but also of someone who had been hurt so deeply she had nothing left to lose. If you want to change, you must prove you are worthy. In that moment, I saw my 3 children, not as reckless spenders, not as warped adults, but as 3 lost children searching for a way back home. When I finished reading the last line of the letter my husband left, the room fell into a heavy silence, so thick I could hear the ticking of the clock. My 3 children stood before me, the ones who had abandoned their father to chase after a meaningless party, and for the first time they bowed their heads, barely daring to breathe. I folded the letter and placed it on the worn wooden table, the same table where my husband used to sit and help the children with their homework. I ran my hand gently across the surface, then said, Your father left behind everything he had, not money, but trust, and today you have shattered it. The eldest spoke, his voice trembling. Mom, we didn't mean to. We just thought... I cut him off. You thought Mum and Dad were just a place to return to when you were tired. But your father died alone. And I have lived in disappointment for so many years. All 3 faces lowered. I looked at them, and I saw the emptiness in each of their eyes. Not because they didn't love the family, but because they had forgotten how to love. I took a slow, deliberate breath. All right, if you truly want to change, I will give you one last chance. The words fell like a blade to the floor, sharp and cold. I turned my back and walked to the slightly ajar wooden door. Outside was the biting night, the same cold I had endured throughout the years of my husband's illness, sleepless nights and tears that no one had witnessed. Still without turning back, I said, But to regain my trust, you must face the truth. Face yourselves. One of them started crying. Mom, please don't abandon us. I gripped the doorframe tightly. Once you step out of this door, I will not turn back. Whoever leaves tonight will no longer be my child." It was the moment that continued the letter left by my husband, as if he were standing beside me, placing a hand on my shoulder and whispering, "Let them choose for themselves." I released the door handle, and then, bang! The sound of kneeling hit the floor behind me, so forceful that I startled and turned around. My 3 children were kneeling on the floor. The floor was cold, the wood hard, yet they did not rise. Tears streamed down their faces. "Mom, give us a chance. Mom, don't leave us. We were wrong. We were truly wrong." I looked at them for a long moment. In that instant, I saw the children of the past, the ones who used to run through the garden, hide in my arms when afraid, and call me, "Mom, you are our home." But I also saw the children of the present, proud, ungrateful, trapped in the whirlpool of selfishness. And that hurt more than any blade ever could. I stepped closer, each step deliberate. Emotions swirled within me like a storm. "Do you know why I had to go this far?" I asked, voice low and cold. "Because I don't want you to become cruel people. You can be rich, you can be successful, but if you are heartless, you will always be failures." They nodded repeatedly, tears flowing without end. I looked up at the ceiling, where I always imagined my husband watching over the 3 of them. I closed my eyes. "All right," I spoke with the voice of someone delivering a final judgment. "If you truly want to start over, stand up. But from today, nothing will come easy anymore." The 3 lifted their heads, eyes red, but for the first time filled with determination. I knew the lesson had sunk in, not because I sought revenge, but because I wanted to save the last remaining thread of this family. And that night I felt it clearly. After all the loss, something was beginning to be reborn.